Good evening, everyone. Thank you all so much for joining us tonight. My name is Jasper Dent. I'm the event coordinator here at McNally Robinson Booksellers, Saskatoon. This event is being held on Treaty 6 territory. This is the land of the Cree, Dene, Saulteaux, Dakota, Nakota, and Lakota, and homeland of the Métis Nation. It's my pleasure to welcome you all to the Saskatoon launch of How to Breathe Water by Sharon Butala. And we've got joining us tonight guest host, Shawn Mooney. You can probably see him sort of sitting behind me here. Before we begin, I would just like to mention that this event is being live streamed, so there's a web camera just up to your right here. And I'd also like to encourage you all to turn off or silence your phones, please and thank you. Don't be the person whose phone rings in the middle of the event. It's very awkward. Thank you so much to both Sharon and Shawn for being here tonight, and to Freehand Books, who published How to Breathe Water for working with us to create this event, to make it happen. So I think probably Sharon Butala doesn't need a whole lot of introduction in Saskatoon, but I am going to say a few words of introduction anyway before I hand things over to her. She is an officer of the Order of Canada, is the award-winning author of 23 books of fiction and nonfiction and 5 produced plays. She's a 3-time finalist for the Governor-General's Literary Award and is a recipient of the Glengarry Book Award, the Marian Engel Award, the Saskatchewan Order of Merit, the Cheryl and Henry Kloppenburg Award for Literary Excellence, the City of Calgary W.O. Mitchell Book Prize, and 3 honorary doctorates. She's returned to Saskatoon from her long exile in Calgary. That sounds harsh. She's returned to Saskatoon, and we're very happy to have her back. So I would like to invite her to up to the stage now. Everyone, please give her a warm welcome.
I got to read from one of these pairs of glasses, but it depends on how I can. I don't
Can't hear you.
Oh, is the mic turned on?
Yeah.
Yes.
Oh. Okay, how's that? I can hear myself, so you must be able to. What I was saying was, these are my reading glasses, but if I'm going to stand here like this, these glasses might do. So if I change glasses midstream, I'm too short to use the podium. That's why I'm standing here because I would be just like from the nose up over the top. It's so wonderful to see so many old friends and relatives and readers that I've met over the years here tonight. I cannot thank you enough because, you know, I was considering suicide. I thought that I was fairly sure my son would come. He's back there, but my mom is dead. So I'm really thrilled. Oops, thank you. Okay, so now I'm going to read 2 sections. Hello, Dave. He was editor of 2 of my books when well, with other publishers. Okay, now this comes from the middle of a section. I mean, what's a prairie if it's not the wind, eh? So instead of trying to pretend it isn't there, I did a whole chapter called Wind. And this is just one of the wind stories. And yet one afternoon on our hay farm down in the Frenchman River Valley, we saw something dark approaching at the bottom of the southeast, supposed to say southwest, sky, just above the rim. That's my fault, nobody else's. Just above the rim of the valley. I went outside to see if I could make out what was coming while Peter and his friend came from the Quonset where we stored machinery and equipment, and Peter kept tools, and where he worked on his tractors, baler, swather, all-terrain vehicle, snowmobile, and whatever else we had in the way of machinery in those days. We 3, some distance apart, stopped on the road, I on one side of it and they on the other, which ran between us from the entrance to the house's yard down to the barn and corrals, just above the Frenchman River, where it made a lovely placid loop around the yard. I was closer to the house and poised to race back into it. Peter and his pal, to my left and behind me as I stood looking into the southeast sky, were ready to run for the Quonset if things got dangerous. As the wind drew closer, I saw it was pink, a wall of dusty pink wind and dirt, not a flashy hot or a pale peony pink, but a dull brownish pink and thickly opaque like a pink smoothie, and coming so fast that the poplars behind me began to whip, and even the caraganas, also behind me to my right, were starting to snap and dance in expectation. It was coming straight for us, sweeping down the hillside to the valley bottom, crossing the narrow river, slamming the corrals, bending our steel corral gates and panels, upending steel-rimmed feeders, blowing away anything not fastened down, and a few things that were. We ran. I for my kitchen, the two men for the wide open mouth of the Quonset, a crazy thing to do, but being rural men, they believed in their own toughness, and they were totally curious, had lived in the heart of nature all their lives. This was something exciting and new, this weird wall of wind. They didn't want to miss a thing, so they could compare notes with their friends later on Coffee Row, or else add this anomaly to their already vast store of knowledge about the prairie. And if there were a cure for such a thing as this breathtakingly precise freight train wind, being rural men, they were probably already planning it. From my kitchen window, I watched it roar on up the yard, through in that naturally treeless land our beloved stand of poplars, breaking off their limbs, even their trunks, collapsing them so that we couldn't get in and out of the yard until they were sawed up and taken away. Then it was gone, heading northeast up out of the valley beyond us. We found later that it had taken off the roof of a steel building on a farm southwest of us and on the flat land above, and went on to take out another one, brand new, just finished, at a farm site a couple of miles northeast of us, also on the flat land above the valley. Strangely, it might have deviated a little in its path when it swept up through the corrals, missing the barn beside them, then funneled itself up the gravel road between the house and the Quonset, missing both of them, and right between where the three of us had been standing, crashing down on our trees before racing across the hayfields up the northeastern valley side and taking out that new long metal shed, which cost thousands. I don't know. The next day they started building a new one. That's a Saskatchewan spirit, eh? Later, I would be amazed by the quantity of greenery those few poplar tree trunks had held up, and that we so loved for their shade and the pretty way their leaves turned, rustled or clapped delicately, or shone like small moons, or were dappled or dark or bright. They smothered our deck, crushed my flower beds, buried the passage between the groups of trees, all those wonderful green leaves and smooth gray-green branches in mere seconds piled up now over my head, all the way to the roof line of our one-story house. In the abrupt ensuing silence, the atmosphere seemed to crackle, and an odor filled the air, a smell new to me that came from the trees, the branches piled up, smashed and crisscrossed, the trunks broken, their ends jagged, the interior wood still fresh and pale, creamy to near white, damp with life. And I thought, how could I not? That this was the lifeblood of the trees as they lay wounded, scintillating in the air. It was the smell of their dying, so that I stood still, breathing in that smell in wonder and pity. Later, the meteorologists would identify this as a plow wind, meaning that it traveled in a straight line, unlike a swirling hurricane or rotating tornado. If I'd been struck at the Frick concert by the accuracy of the wind as if guided by an unseen hand, once again we were mystified by the way it ran up the lane, hitting the corrals, but missing the barn, deviating to miss the men in the Quonset, yet not so far as to strike me, just slamming the kitchen door behind me, then deviating back east again to tear the roof off that brand new long shed a couple of miles northeast of us, as if it wasn't interested in doing us serious damage. But what a ridiculous idea, I thought, and think now, but with fingers crossed behind my back. Were not those trees serious damage? Okay. And now I'm skipping to something philosophical, just so you know it's a memoir and not a bunch of stories I made up. Although it could be. Except some of the people in the audience were present at some of the stuff I wrote here. Done with this journey of thinking through my life, I refuse to think about the past anymore, refuse to share. Remember the time when stories with my remaining sisters wouldn't get into anything more than a cursory discussion of our parents, shied away from rehearsals of old stories. I can't even remember them, I would say. I even claimed in an essay in This Strange Visible Air, Essays on Aging and the Writing Life, 2021, that I did not remember the past, that I had put it away forever and was mightily pleased with myself about it. Psychotherapists who might have heard of this must have laughed their heads off, but I remember reading somewhere about Buddhist monks whose wisdom I respected, who said that. I thought this stance a nobler one than constantly going over the past, blaming or celebrating others, or sinking into it, smiling dreamily or glaring furiously as I sat by the window, seeing nothing of the present as it passed busily by. More truthfully, the past assailed me, would not let me sleep, nor see the world with new eyes each morning. It was a quagmire threatening to suck me down into it, from which I would never free myself, never be whole, never be a free person in the world. Should I say, never be alive? I decided to live as if none of it had ever happened. I had become so successful at this approach that I had emotionally pretty much frozen solid. My hope was to stay that way forever. Was that what Paul Bowles, author of the classic The Sheltering Sky, did? He has been reported as cold, unemotional, distant, a state my best efforts have never quite taken me to. But even with my hesitation and uncertainty, and as I struggled to remember the places Lucinda and I had gone and what had confronted me there in terms of my younger life, it was as if somehow along the road I had torn a rent in the fabric of my self-protection. And since our trip, I kept reading, thinking, trying to remember details. Small scintillations of memory had begun returning, details of no particular consequence nor any deep emotion, just small remembrances in quick flashes of this or that out from my life. In squelching my responses to the major events in my life, I'd also ripped away the daily texture of it. And I pondered that, puzzled as to whether that loss mattered or not. But every little flash surprised me again into realizing I had been alive all along. I had had a life like everyone else. Eventually, I realized that our trip would make a good frame for another memoir. This seemed delightfully obvious, and I began to think of how I would write it. For a long time, I hesitated, probably in fear that the result wouldn't just be prairie history, geography, and culture I'd be writing, but my own. And although this hesitation wasn't clear to me, I must have been afraid. More than once, I thought of the dream of the dripping water that would drown me if I let it. I put the idea away and turned to other writings. Rather like the time that Peter and I were flying in a small plane, he beside the pilot who had trained him to fly, and I alone in the back, where there was room for another passenger or two. We had flown only a short distance when we entered a bank of impenetrable fog or mist or cloud. We could see nothing out of any of the windows but the same even, flat, grayish-white matter that cloaked all the world from us. The pilot, who had trained pilots in World War II, shifted in his seat, straightened, grasped the steering wheel. I don't think you call that a steering wheel, right? I don't know what it's called. I can't remember. Grasped the steering wheel more firmly with both hands, telling us the cloud rose too high and too low to fly over or under it. Muttered something to my husband as he pointed to an instrument on the dash that I understood represented the horizon line, and flew us for 2 more hours with intense, silent concentration to our destination, where the cloud cleared and he was able to land easily. And I? The moment I understood that our situation was perilous, that our lives depended on the pilot not losing his concentration or his sanity, did I sit wide awake behind him, tensed with fear, keeping my eye on the instrument panel? No, I fell like a stone into sleep and did not wake until we were about to land. it might be said, with regard to my memory, that as I wrote my third memoir, it was now time to wake up, time to land. Thank you.
Hey, so Sharon and Shawn are going to sit down and have a chat now, but before that happens, I would like to introduce you all to Shawn Mooney. Shawn is a booktuber. If you're not familiar with that term, it refers to a group of people on YouTube who are all avid readers and who have channels where they discuss books. So Shawn is based in Saskatoon, and his channel is Shawn Breathes Books, where he primarily reads and discusses literary fiction, including works in translation and by queer Western Canadian and women writers. So I'm sure you're all in good hands with Shawn tonight, and I'm going to move this microphone over so that you can hear Sharon again, and we'll get started.
That's happening. I want to make sure that you guys can all hear me. Loud enough or closer, close enough to my sensuous lips.
Good. Yes, good. Yeah, that's better. Okay, thank you.
I also want to make sure everybody knows that there is a special bookmark commemorating the launch of How to Breathe Water. I worked with Freehand Books in Calgary to get this designed and printed, so it's free. If I haven't already given you one, there's a stack at the signing table. There's another stack by the books over there, and come up and ask me for one after. What an honor to be here with Sharon Butala. I'm one of her biggest fans. I got infected with the bug from my mom, who is one of her other biggest fans. And I discovered her late in my reading life, and the perfection of the morning just blew me away. And I thought, oh, she'll never top that. And then just a few months ago, I read Where I Live Now, and I thought, oh my God, she's outdone herself. And then How to Breathe Water just gutted me. I love this book so much. This is the first time I've done a live interview. I do a lot of interviews on a channel talking to an empty screen. This is quite a different thing. But how lovely that the first time I do this, it's a book that I feel so passionate about. So my challenge, and I must accept it, because not only is Sharon here, but David Carpenter's within spitting distance. I don't want to gush. But the most articulate I could be when I put the book down after finishing it a few weeks ago, was that it felt like more than just a book. It felt like a living, breathing thing. And I hope some of that gets across in our conversation. So Sharon, thank you for asking me to do this. Tell us more about your road trip and your partner, Lucinda.
Oh, this is a road trip book. Sorry that I should be sitting on a block or something so you can see me. Yeah, it's a road trip book. And, you know, the minute you say road trip, you think Jack Kerouac, what's his name? Bruce Chatwin, even Emily Carr, dozens of others. Well, of course, the first one is going to be, oh my God, how could I forget the most wonderful book I've ever read? Spanish, Shakespeare contemporary.
Don Quixote.
Don Quixote, yeah. So I thought, you know, can I do anything with Don Quixote? But the answer is no. It's just such a good book. Anyway, so Lucinda is not the woman's real name. She was a friend of mine who was 18 years younger. She's a poet, which means she's okay, but she's not quite normal. I mean, and we got along just so great. And the fact that she was 18 years younger never seemed to interfere at all. And she didn't, I made the decision not to use her real name, and she went along with that. And I picked the name Serena, and she said, please, I hate that name. So I tried Lucinda, which she didn't like any better, but I didn't want to change again. And I like Lucinda. So we went off. The whole thing was she asked me in March, maybe, if I would go with her on a week-long drive to Winnipeg, where she had spent, as the book says, an indelibly happy week with her father's parents when she was 5 years old. And I just said, sure, why not? And because she's very competent, she got right up as high as you can get before the day you put your foot on the Olympic track itself. And that was only sports double dealing that she didn't. So she's very competent, you know, and twice my size. So I thought, terrific. I don't have to do anything. I don't even have to think. Sure, I'll go with you. And that's along the way. See, what we were doing was we were leaving Calgary, going south to Maple Creek, taking a dip down to the hay farm. We didn't go to the ranch, coming back up to Swift Current, and then on to Regina, and then on to Winnipeg, where we spent 3 nights, and then back to Regina and north to Saskatoon, and then to Calgary. And we did all of that from 10 o'clock Sunday morning to about 10 o'clock the following Saturday night, I think it was. And all along the way, I told her this is the perimeter, the boundary of my life since I was 13 years old. This is where my life happened, you know, except for a few years in Halifax and so on. And wouldn't it make a great memoir? And she said, yeah, yeah. Look at the Nightingale. Actually, it was Meadowlark. And then I thought, I'm never writing that book. No, thank you. But a year later, it never left me alone. A year later, I started writing. And, you know, this is the result. And there are things in it that you would never guess from the readings that I gave would actually be in there, which comes to.
Absolutely. A couple of days before you embarked on this road trip, you had a pretty interesting dream that there was a reference to it in what you read. Can you give us a little bit more of a tease about the dream?
Oh, yeah. I was in a kitchen that for some reason looked like a 40s kitchen. I was standing in a corner where the kitchen cupboards met the walls like that. I was just standing right there. All of a sudden, I felt a drop of water hit me on the top of the head. And the water, it was big, big tear-shaped drop. And more and more and more started coming. And were coming faster from the ceiling. And there's a lot more detail. And I realized if I didn't do something, it was going to flood us all. I was going to drown. And that was a dream, which I keep referring to. And there is a kind of a resolution concerning it, which is, and the whole book is, you know, my agent, who's actually a lawyer, said, well, I got so far into the book and I want to know, where do you tell us how to breathe water? And I didn't even answer her. It's a metaphor. So anyway, she's a good agent though.
I thought that's what the glass of water was for. You were going to do a demo.
No way. No.
Later in the book, you say that one of the first rules of the writer's craft is, all caps, do not write dreams. And you have consistently ignored that. And how do you tell us a bit more about dreams in your writing and in your life? And how do you do it in a way that isn't woo-woo? Because you are not woo-woo. So how do you tell us a bit more about you and dreams?
Well, I would swear I live about half my life in dreams. I actually wait for the one that will explain things to me, you know, and when the going gets tough. And I have done that for many, many years now. I'm possibly less interested in dreams now than I used to be, but it's you know, there are all sorts of different explanations, and there are people who have actually put in writing that I'm just a crazy person. But for me, it's just another way of the consciousness that rules most of us, of it expanding and opening when these bits of subconscious rises, makes a breakthrough and tells us a little bit more than our consciousness is willing to admit to or to understand. And I make dreams have been for many years very important to me. When I put them in books, sometimes I make them up, and often I change them, and I skip out all the details, you know, that would bore people, at least that wouldn't, then the point would get lost, you know. And I try to be sparing about it because I really do think people do not like to read dreams. You know, they'd rather have the real people doing stuff.
Your trip in the summer of 2021 was kind of at the tail end or late middle part of COVID. And it was also during the time where the unmarked graves at residential schools across Canada were being found. And that was so like a great cloud over Canada. You, I think, were ahead of your time in perceiving the injustice that colonial Canada has perpetrated on Indigenous peoples whose lands we stole. Tell us a bit about that part of this book, because it's a really powerful strand of the memoir.
Well, I think that when we had left, we already had the first announcement of the first residential school, the belief that at least that the markings found in the school grounds were the graves, at least some of them, of children who had died at the school and whose graves were not recorded. And we were driving along, and the Cowessess Reserve, which is 15 miles north of Broadview, had just within that week, I believe, made that announcement as we were driving through. And we we're both mothers, you know, and writers, and we were both just stunned into absolute silence. But when I started writing the book, it seemed, and after that, everywhere we went, there were the little children's shoes in prominent places. And then I began to think about my own life in Saskatchewan. I was born in Nipawin, as were 3 of my 4 sisters. We never lived there. Dad had a sawmill up in the bush, and it was not very long after the government had opened that land up for farming, which was bush country. You know, that's where the Swampy Cree live. And in fact, the land that white people moving in thought was theirs, and that they were taking down the trees and pulling out the roots and all the rest of it, I'm pretty sure belonged to the, not, belong is the wrong word, because First Nations people, at least in Canada, do not talk about owning land. They don't own it. It was a gift from the Creator, and you can't own it. But that was their hunting and trapping and fishing grounds. And they're the people of the Red Earth Cree Nation, the Swampy Cree. And then I realized that, like, my earliest memories were of some of these men, because I was born in 1940, so it was during the Second World War, were working for my dad. And I remember seeing them in the cook shack, sitting at the table, all of them eating. And then I began to realize bit by bit that my whole life had been in some, you know, I can't think of the right word, but not a way that you consciously notice, but that not just my life, but people of my generation, our lives had always been intertwined in some way that we chose to set them aside. We chose to ignore what we were seeing. We chose to, wherever possible, not include them. and yet there they always were. And that there wasn't a separation between us settlers, we settler people. Especially not if you went up north into the bush like we did. I mean, I could say a whole lot more, but we don't have time. And it's just a thought that I realized just when I was thinking about tonight, that it hadn't been that we led separate lives. I mean, I remember teaching school in Princess Alex on Avenue H and behind what used to be a Safeway on 20th. There are two old schools there. And those kids were at that time still going to residential schools. We had one boy brave enough to be in our school. And, you know, this great big terrible issues and yelling and screaming, and he walked out, and one of the teachers, he was a big tall guy, and one of the teachers called him an animal because he punched our principal, who was our favorite man in the whole world at that time. And you know, that wasn't part of my life. You know, he wasn't part of my life. It was a shameful thing, and it would never happen today, but that's how it's been all along, you know. Well, I'm talking too much.
Well, I think that's why we're all here, to hear you talk. There are very intimate revelations that you make in this memoir that you have not disclosed publicly before. And the courage that it took for you to go on that journey and tell the world through this book some of the deepest wounds that you have is part of the power of this book. You also write, somebody kind of criticized you for saying things that were too personal or something, and you wrote, "I suspect the unsayable is all that's worth saying."
Yeah, because everything else has been said over and over and over again in hundreds of different ways and different circumstances. And it's not that there's anything wrong about that. I think that's how it should be, I guess. When we write our books, I think that all of us are reaching for some kind of a truth, but we all have our limits to what we're willing to say out loud. And as the years have passed, and this is my 23rd book and my 3rd memoir, I've gotten closer and closer and closer to being able to say some of the things that others would never say. I've been teaching memoir writing for a long time now, and I used to read every memoir that was written, but I've given it up. There's just too many. In the beginning, they were always, most of the ones were written by American women. They were kind of spoiled brat, whiny books, most of them, you know, I thought. And that got boring really fast. And we don't have yet that I know about, but there are some profs in the audience who would know, a canon of Canadian memoirs. You know, when I started teaching, I was looking all over for them and couldn't find any. Anyway, what I'm heading toward is I finally decided, once again, thinking about Shawn's questions, trying to think up an answer to that one. Probably better if I keep the pages right side up. Here we are. I think that I finally decided that the question I think was what's unsayable, and I thought about it and thought about anyway, thinking about those young American women's memoirs. They were about many subjects that I would never have written about. The one that always comes first to mind is about a young woman who claimed to have had an affair with her father. There are all kinds of drug addiction memoirs, all kinds of, you know, the kind of thing I'm thinking about. They're everywhere. Then I started to think, so why is what I've written about, and there are all kinds of books about it now, in the category of the unsayable? And I think the thing that's unsayable for everybody is what goes on in the unruly soul of each of us. That's what we can't say out loud. It's easy to say, I had an affair with my father. Yeah, but how easy is it to say your shame, your disgust, your amazement, your sorrow, your grief? You know, that's what most writers can't go to. They can't go there. They can blame. I'm pretty good at that part too, actually. I'm very good at blaming. It's all Shawn's fault.
I knew we'd get there eventually.
My son's name is Shawn also, but they spell it differently, so we always have to be careful about which one I'm talking about.
I'm the second favorite. Jasper, what do you think? Is it time to go? I have more questions, but maybe it's time to throw it open for your questions.
It's only 7:36, so we've still got some time.
Well, why don't we come back to me? Why don't we go? I think there might be tons of questions, better than mine. Sure.
Shawn's microphone is now my microphone. Audience, if you have any questions, please put up your hand and I will bring the microphone to you so that we can all hear what you have to ask, Sharon. First.
Sharon, you mentioned that that kind of a memoir is something you would never write, and then a year passed and you started writing it. What do you think went on between the resolute refusal and the actual writing?
Some scenes, I think. One of them was driving up and down the highway between Regina and Saskatoon from, I remember the summer that I married my first husband. He had been in Europe all summer and he hadn't been getting my letters, which was my fault. And I woke up about 4 a.m, someone throwing pebbles against my bedroom window up on the second floor in Regina where I was working for the summer. And it was him back from Europe because he hadn't been getting my letters. So it was always sad. Anyway, I remember driving from Regina up to Saskatoon on that highway the summer of '61, when we had the worst drought this province has ever had in recorded memory. And I remembered how beautiful it was, how stunningly beautiful. I could never forget those fields and fields of wheat and, all yellow, and the air, the heat, which when I was young, and I was 21 in '61, so I was really young, the heat never bothered me a bit. I loved it. And the smell in the air of the wheat. I always thought, I don't know if other people think that, but that it was the wheat roasting on the stalks, it was, never forgot it. And then go ahead 50 years, maybe, that's just an estimate, driving my dying second husband up from the hospital in Regina to the hospital in Saskatoon, where he was going to be evaluated pre-surgery. And when they got there, of course, one by one, the specialists came in, stood at the foot of his bed and said they couldn't do anything. It was too late. And I took him home and he died a week later. But the drive up, he was tall, and unlike, he hated me driving. His whole life, rural men and their trucks, it's a very masculine thing. And when I had to start driving, he just hated it and he'd be cranky, and he was never a cranky man. Anyway, we got out of Regina. He pushed the lever, pushed his seat back, put his legs out, leaned back, and spent the whole 3 hours. I don't think he said a single word, just staring out the window. And I slowed right down so he could see what would have been his life passing by, kind of. And he never said, go faster. He never said, and he never went to sleep. He just watched and watched and watched. And if you're rural, you know about the windshield survey. Eh? So he was doing a windshield survey.
Do we have another
Oh.
question? Oh, sorry.
Yeah, I
No.
forgot the reason I was telling you that.
No.
Thinking of things like that, I suddenly thought, I want to write that stuff, you know? It wasn't that I want to tell my story, but as I got writing, the other thing I want to say, if I may, is that the one thing we haven't hit yet is what I did that was different with this book that I've never done with another book, and I'm not at all sure I've ever read a memoir that worked this way, was I made up my mind that I was not going to plan ahead. I was not going to write outlines and this chapter and that chapter, and then here we jump to, you know, etc. None of that. I was going to start writing following the trip, the days, the places where we stopped, and I was going to allow myself to free associate. And I was thinking of W.G. Sebald, if you know his work. I was just insane about those books. They were so wonderful. They are. And I thought, one of the things I always thought about them was that you'd be reading along about a certain place and a certain walk or a certain whatever building, and all of a sudden you'd be in another country looking at something different. And how did that happen? I don't remember that jump, you know? So I would go back and I read the books over again to see what he had done. And I thought, I can do that. Piece of cake. So I just let myself go. And then every once in a while I have to read what I'd written and think, hey, wait a minute, you know, I have to keep remembering I'm on a trip with my friend Lucinda, and we never had a single fight, because when I was mad at her, I kept smiling. And when she was mad at me, same thing. We never said a word. And we just got along, you know, and we didn't, unlike Jack Kerouac, we weren't questing. We just wanted to find that house in Winnipeg. And we weren't determined to prove our womanhood. I mean, if we were, we wouldn't be doing it in a four-door sedan Toyota, none too new, on the highway to Winnipeg. I just wanted to say this is my life, you know, and it included a lot of things you would not think, because I don't talk about them. Okay, sorry.
No, that was the point, just to answer questions. This is good. Does anyone have another question? I'm going to stare at you all awkwardly until someone puts their hand up.
Yeah, right.
Or I can bring it back to Shawn because he said he had more questions. Going once, giving twice. Okay, Shawn, I'm going to give it back to your questions.
So you read that incredible passage about the wind. I wrote it word for word. It was one of my favorite phrases in the book. Where is it here? This breathtakingly precise freight train wind. Nature, your nature writing is just incredible. Threaded through your fiction and your memoir. And so you write very explicitly in here that the prairie has a soul. Tell us, riff for as long as you like, about your elemental connection to the natural world and how that feeds into your writing life and your existence as a political thinker, as a philosophical thinker and writer.
Well, I think one of the worst things that industrialization brought, like, I'm the first person ever said that, of course, has done is has alienated us from nature. In Saskatchewan, we're a lot better off than I think probably people who live in that whole greater Toronto area, you know, the millions of people who live there. But I think to lead a full life, you absolutely have to have contact with nature. And that's the sad part, that for many people it's easily to say things like that because we're all university educated, and when we were working we had good jobs, and we could get away and take holidays and stay at the lake and so on. Well, there's thousands of Canadians who've never done such a thing in their lives and will never be able to. And when I was a kid, I was one of them. The only thing was that we lived in the middle of nature. I was born into the middle of nature, you know, up in the settlement days, up in the bush. And what I remembered all my life, it's just fading now. I turned 85 toward the end of August, so things start to go, you know. Ugh. Anyway, was the howling of wolves. How I'd never heard anything in my life so frightening and wrenching as the sound of wolves howling. They seemed like they were just like, I remember sitting on the swings at twilight in the schoolyard in White Fox. I would have been 5 years old. And I wouldn't sit on the swings the way you were supposed to, so that you were facing the school. I mean, I wasn't in the school, but it was village, you know, a hamlet. And there was nothing for kids to do. So I was sitting there. I would turn around and face the bush because I couldn't have those wolves behind me and me not keeping an eye out for them. And of course, we were always had bears. Even the First Nations people, if you read the literature, David Meyer, the anthropologist, archaeologist, I mean, is the expert on the swampy Cree and that area. And he records, I think, in one of his papers how the Swampy Cree men, with whom he was quite close in his working days anyway, said to him how a guy from the south had come up and they were laughing and said, and he was more afraid of the wolves than he was of the bears. And they were laughing about it because the bears were so much more terrifying and harder to escape. And, you know, there were one of the things that somebody told me along the way that I put in a short story was a First Nations elder telling a white person who was going for a walk around the lake in a resort area that was quite wild. And he said, when you are walking, don't say their name, don't think of them, call them the big one, so they won't know you're thinking about them. You know, that's how our lives are entwined with that knowledge. You know, like when you start life and that's what you're, and the other thing was the Northern Lights. I was just a little wee kid, but every night, all over the sky. And I remember in Melfort when we were, was another one of our stops along our journey to Saskatoon. We kids were always out on the gravel streets of the town at that time, playing until it got dark, and we were playing kick the can and games like that you probably remember. And I remember this one time we looked up in the sky and there were these colored lights, and I wasn't really afraid, but kids love to pretend they're afraid, you know. And all the other kids, they were all ages, they were looking up the sky and they were saying, like the Kerlick painting, what's that? And we all just beat it out of there as fast as we could go, running pell-mell in every direction. I ran home and I said, Mom, what are those lights in the sky? She said, it's the Northern Lights. You know, we all kind of knew that, but that was how I was a kid, you know, and that's imprinted in you forever. And then when I finally got back to married to Peter and lived on the ranch and the hay farm for over 30 years, I spent most of my time out on the prairie. And I just never wanted to be anywhere else.
And you've talked and written about how that your connection to nature is such an important part of guiding you on what you call it, your spiritual search. Can you say more about that?
Well, you know, I was alone so much of the time. If Peter wasn't out helping somebody round up cattle or at a branding or something, he was off in the town, one of the towns, paying bills. And I was, his mother and had her 2 daughters, but I didn't have anyone. And you drive down to Old Nana's back now and see how remote that place is to this very day. There were more people there when Peter was growing up than there are today by a long shot. So one time I was out walking and Peter's mother drove up and she stopped the truck and she said, "It's been a long time since a woman walked down the prairie." Because what else were you going to do with yourself? She would go and play with the colts. I started to do that. And you just make sure that it was a safe field and that the bulls weren't out. And then you just start walking. And I used to take a book for about 3 times. And then I realized, my God, what am I doing that for? And I got more and more and more and more specific about what I wanted to see. And I bought all these books on everything from fossils to, the snakes. There are all kinds of snakes on the prairie. People never see them, but they're everywhere. Once you start to see them, you see them. Anyway, I don't know if that answered anything. This is one of the things that's happened to me now that I'm old, is I lose track of whatever I was talking about. I'm having too much fun.
We're on the topic of fun. This I don't think is in the book, but you told me about when Peter Zosky asked somebody, I forget who he asked. He asked them, "Are cows stupid?" Can you tell us about that?
Oh yeah, well, some of you here probably heard it. In the Zosky days, he was interviewing a cattle rancher, and he said to the rancher, "Tell me, are cows stupid?" And there was this long pause, and then the rancher said, "Well, they sure know how to hide a calf so you can't find it." And then there was this dead silence because Zosky had no idea what he was talking about. And so he just let it go and changed the subject. So I asked Peter, I said, not because I thought cows were stupid, I was curious. I was just constantly watching them because they were so interesting. And so I asked him, "What do you think?" And another long pause, because part of most of these guys is that they never say anything without thinking about it first. And then he said, "Well, they know what they need to know." That was a brilliant answer. Yeah, really, it's exactly right. What they need to know. Did you know they babysit each other's calves? Anybody, like there's Alan David back there, he's a ranch boy, he knows. Lots of wonderful things like that. Now, what was the question?
Are cows stupid? Are cows stupid? I think you've explained they are definitely not stupid.
Yeah, and the thing about hiding calves is in the spring, when they have to go off and feed or get water, they don't always take new calves with them, but they've got to protect them because there are coyotes out there that will attack and kill them. And that's when the babysitting comes in, but then they don't always do that. They will take the calf and put it in a place on the prairie. And where is there to hide on the prairie? Well, cows can find it. A clump of sage, a big rock, just somewhere where they're out of sight. And the rancher will ride and ride and ride for hours and come home and give up, can't find the calf.
Jasper, should we try again?
All right. Has anyone thought of another question?
I'm so disappointed in you.
This is a very shy audience.
Yes, I'm working on another book.
My gosh, you're answering the questions that haven't even been asked yet. Fantastic.
I've done this before.
Okay. Last chance. No? Yeah? Oh, okay, perfect.
Hi, Sharon.
Hi.
I've lived in Calgary as well for some time, and I just moved back to Saskatchewan. And I'm kind of slow to find community back home here. And I just wondered if you could tell me, living in Calgary all these years, you use the word assailed by memory. Do you feel like your isolation in Calgary has remained kind of sealed and impenetrable, or is it becoming more permeable?
Oh, yeah, the isolation in Calgary was because I had never gone to school there, didn't raise kids there. I didn't have connections there at all, except for some cousins. So as I once said to my cousin Mildred over there, to a group that I was speaking to, when young writers ask me for advice, I always tell them have lots of cousins. And then you're not lonely in Calgary. Except I had lots of cousins and I was still lonely. If you don't have memories, if you don't have background, a place, even in the midst of a crowd, you feel unseated, you feel lost, kind of. And finally, when I was 83, I said to myself, I can't stand this anymore, because the older I got, the more isolated I was, because I couldn't drive at night. None of my friends were one by one stopping driving. The city had already gained the whole city of Swift Current in 1 year, and a whole bunch more people. It was getting so much bigger than when I had moved there 15 years earlier, and I had energy to burn in those days, and I was excited to be in the city. But that wears off pretty darn fast, and you just want to be in a place where you know your way around, you're not always getting lost, and where this is something that I don't think ever happened once in 15 years in Calgary. I was walking down the street and saw somebody I knew. And it happens to me once a week in Saskatoon. Every time I just, oh, this is so great. You know, even though most of the people who are family are dead, they're in Woodlawn, or they're long gone, you know, so to other places. So yeah, coming here was the best thing I ever did. I made it. It took me a year to move, and I made it the 1st of June, 24. So I've been here 15 months now. I have another cousin here too, by the way. So there. Sandra's back there. She's my cousin. And no, never mind.
Any other questions here? Yeah.
Hi, Sharon.
Hello.
I imagine the process of writing down your memories like this must make some of the moments come more alive than others. I was wondering, based upon this odyssey that you did, this crazy road trip, do you have a favorite moment that comes to mind that you're willing to share with the audience here?
Sure. For my friend Lucinda, it was when a friend in Winnipeg knew that the street address that she had, that the street had changed names, and she knew how to find the house, and it was on the banks of the Assiniboia in what was once the prime place to live in Winnipeg, and it was a big, beautiful house, just as she remembered it from when she was a child, and that for her had to have been the highlight of the trip. So we actually reached our original destination, and Winnipeg's full of my relatives, but I made sure none of them knew I was there. Because I will do it again. So anyway, what was the highlight of the trip for me? I was asking myself when I was writing, and I thought, well, I don't know, maybe it was the night we hit Saskatoon, which for her made her very uneasy, but I was so full of memories and so completely unafraid. It was that we got in quite late, and Ruth back there, we were meeting her for dinner, and we were staying at the Besborough because Lucinda wanted to. And so Ruth arrived, we started walking. It was, as I remember, twilight by that time. We were walking up, is that 21st? that the Bez is at the end of?
Yes.
Yeah, we were looking for a place to have supper and we were all starving, I guess. And we finally gave up and decided that we would go into a particular restaurant that I first knew when it was brand new and had a different location than I used to go to after yoga with a different friend. Anyway, we went in, but walking up the streets, it was, must have been some reason it was a no vehicle street. And the street was just crowded with young people, by whom I mean people up to 30-ish in age, in groups. And the air was thick with marijuana smoke and people vaping. And nobody was moving to make way for one old lady and her younger friend. They were having too much fun. And I mean, as I say in the book, no shots rang out. There was nobody yelling and screaming. Everybody was just having fun. And I remember the time when I was coming out of, Ruth might have been there that years ago, coming out when they had briefly a bar in the basement or the ground floor of the Bez. And we had been sitting in there drinking a little bit of beer and came out on the street, and we were all a bit drunk, I guess, typically. And we were heading to a place where you could dance. And one of my girlfriends sat down on the curb, and there wasn't a policeman to be seen this time. And along came this cop, and he said to her that she had to stand up and move along, at which point she fell in love with him. I had a good time when I was young, occasionally. Anyway, we persuaded her that she had to move. Actually, I could explain that, but I'm not going to. It's more fun if I don't. So we're walking up the street in that crowd, and everybody's laughing and having fun, and it's so hot, sweat's pouring off people, and the air is filled with substances that it took me a while to remember weren't illegal anymore. And I just kind of relaxed into it, a summer night in July. What could be better when it's winter 9 months of the year here, you know? And Lucinda said she was very uncomfortable. She had never seen anything like that. She was from the West Coast. So that was a highlight for me because it reminded me of how much fun I once had in this city. I had some horrible, awful, miserable, rotten, terrible times too. But who cares?
Okay, we are about at time here, so I'm going to hand this mic back to Shawn to finish us off. I will just say first that if you would like to get a signed copy of How to Breathe the Water,
Right, yeah.
we've got some up here, and we've got some on the desk by where you first walked in, and also on some shelves if you really feel like going for a wander. And you're welcome to get your book signed before you purchase it. We just ask that you please do remember to stop by the cash desk on your way out. All right, Shawn,
And
let's...
before you say
Oh.
anything, Shawn, I want to say thank you very much for doing this for me tonight. You were terrific.
And so my last question for Sharon, you didn't say, did you inhale? In the book, people, you have to. And don't forget to pick up your bookmark when whether you buy the book or not. The bookmarks are free. I have put on the bookmark my favorite quote from How to Breathe Water. And I'd like to close with this. This journey that I hadn't planned for nor wanted to make, yet found myself a captive of, driven on helplessly, tumultuously through. My own struggle to find myself inside the dream of the West. Inspiring is almost, it's not a strong enough adjective for me, for how this book affected me. I feel like this is a book that invites the reader to be courageous and emboldens the reader to plumb the depths of their own soul. And that's just a tremendous gift. So I just want to say thank you very much.
Thank you.